Good evening. This is Mrs. Bloom reading Artemis Fowl by Eoin Colfer. We are in Chapter 8 titled Troll, and Cudgeon, who was second in command of the Leprechaun, has now been promoted after backstabbing Julius Root, and has decided to let a troll loose in order to force Artemis to give up Holly Short. So here we continue. Holly had a plan of sorts: sneak around shielded, reclaim some fairy weaponry, then cause havoc until Fowl was forced to release her. And if several million Irish pounds worth of property damage happened to ensue, well, that was just a bonus. Holly hadn't felt so good in years. Her eyes blazed with power, and there were sparks sizzling below every centimeter of skin. She'd forgotten just how good running hot felt. Captain Short felt in control now on the hunt. This is what she was trained to do. When this affair had started, the advantage had been with the Mud People. But now the boot was on the other foot. She was the hunter, and they were the prey. Holly scaled the great staircase, ever vigilant for the giant manservant. That was one individual she wasn't taking any chances with. Those fingers closed around her skull. She was history, helmet or not, assuming she managed to find the helmet. The vast house was like a mausoleum, without a single sign of life inside its vaulted rooms. Spooky portraits, though, each one of the foul eyes, suspicious and glittering. Holly determined to torch the lot of them when she recovered her Neutrino 2000. Vindictive, perhaps, but totally justified, considering what Artemis Fowl had put her through. She scaled the steps swiftly, following the curve around the upper landing. A slot of pale light peeped from under the last door in the corridor. Holly placed her palm against the wood, feeling for vibration. Activity, all right. Shouting and footsteps, then thundering this way. Holly jumped back, flattening herself against the velveteen wallpaper, not a moment too soon. A hulking shape burst through the doorway and hurled down the corridor, leaving a maelstrom of air currents in his wake. "Juliet!" he shouted, his sister's name hanging in the air long after he disappeared down the stairs. Don't worry, Butler, thought Holly. She's having the time of her life, glued to WrestleMania. But the open door presented a welcome opportunity. She slipped through before the mechanical arm could close it again. Artemis Fowl was waiting, anti-shield filters cobbled onto his sunglasses. "Good evening, Captain Short," he began, confidence apparently intact. "At the risk of sounding cliched, I've been expecting you." Holly didn't respond, didn't even look at her jailer in the eye. Instead, she utilized her training to scan the room, her gaze resting briefly on each surface. "You are, of course, still bound by the promises earlier tonight." But Holly wasn't listening. She was sprinting toward a stainless steel workbench bolted to the far wall. "So basically our situation hasn't changed. You're still my hostage." Yeah, muttered Holly, running her fingers over the rows of confiscated retrieval equipment. She selected a stealth-coated helmet, slipping it over her pointed ears. The pneumatic pads pumped to cradle her crown. She was safe now. Any further commands given by Fowl meant nothing through the reflective visor. A wire mic slotted down automatically. Contact was immediate. "On revolving frequencies. Broadcasting on revolving frequencies. Holly, if you can hear me, take cover." Holly recognized Foley's voice, something familiar in a crazy situation. "Repeat. Take cover. Cudgeon is sending in a—" "Something I should know," said Artemis. "Quiet," hissed Holly, worried by the tone of Foley's usually flippant voice. "I say again, they are sending a troll to secure your release." Holly started. Cudgeon was calling the shots now? Not good news at all. Fowl interrupted again. "It's not polite, you know, ignoring your host." Holly snarled. "Enough is enough." She pulled her fist, fingers curled in a tight bunch. Artemis didn't flinch. Why would he? Butler always intervened before punches landed. But then something caught his eye. A large figure running down the hallway on the first-floor monitor. It was Butler. "That's right, rich boy," said Holly nastily. "You're on your own this time." And before Artemis' eyes had time to widen, Holly put in an extra pounds of spring in her elbow and whacked her abductor right on the nose. "Ooh!" he said, collapsing on his rear end. "Oh, yes, that felt good." Holly focused on the voices buzzing in her ear. "We've been feeding a loop to the outside cameras so the humans won't see anything come up the avenue, but it's on my way, trust me. Foley, come in." "Holly, is that you?" "The one and only, Foley. There is no loop. I can see everything that's going on around here." "That cunning little—" "He must have rebooted the system." The avenue was a hive of fairy activity. Cudgeon was there haughtily directing his team of sprites. In the center of the melee stood a 16-foot tall hover cage floating on a cushion of air. The cage was directly before the manor door, and the techies were securing a concussor seal to the surrounding wall. When activated, several alloy rods in the seal's collar would be detonated simultaneously, effectively disintegrating the door. When the dust settled, the troll would have only one place to go, into the manor. Holly checked the other monitors. Butler had managed to drag Juliet from the cell. They had descended from the cellular level and were just crossing the lobby, right in the line of fire. "Darn it!" she swore, crossing the work surface. Artemis was propped on his elbows. "You hit me," he said in disbelief. Holly strapped on a set of hummingbirds. "That's right, Fowl, and there's plenty more where that came from. Stay right here, if you know what's good for you." For once in his life, Artemis realized he didn't have a snappy answer. He opened his mouth, waiting for his brain to supply the customary pithy comeback, but nothing arrived. Holly slipped the Neutrino 2000 into its holder. "That's right, mud boy. Playtime's over. Time for professionals to take over. If you're a good boy, I'll buy you a lollipop when I get back." When Holly was long gone, soaring beneath the hallway's ancient oak beams, Artemis said, I don't like lollipops." It was a woefully inadequate response, and Artemis was instantly appalled with himself. Pathetic, really. "I don't like lollipops." No self-respecting criminal mastermind would be caught dead even using the word lollipop. He would really have to put together a database of witty responses for occasions such as this. It was quite possible that Artemis would have sat like that for some time, totally detached from the situation on hand, if had not the front door exploded, shaking the manor to its foundations. A thing like this is hard enough to knock a daydream from anybody's head. A sprite alighted before Acting Commander Cudgeon. "Collar's in place, sir." Cudgeon nodded. "Are you sure it's tight, Captain? I don't want that troll coming out the wrong way." "Tighter'n a goblin wallet, and that's not a bubble of air getting through that sealed. Tighter'n a stinking worm's—" Cudgeon nodded. "Very well, Captain," before the sprite could complete his graphic analogy. Beside them, the hover cage shook violently, almost toppling the container from its air cushion. Oh my goodness. Hold on a second, guys. I need to change something really quick. Alright, we better blow that sucker, Commander. If we don't let him out soon, my boys are going to spend the next week scraping... Fine, Captain. Blow it, for goodness sake." Cudgeon hurried behind the blast shield, scribbling a note on his palm screen. "Memo, remind the sprites to watch their language. After all, I am in command now." The foul-mouthed captain in question turned to the hover cage cab driver. "Blow her, Chicks. Blow the door off its damn hinges." "Yes, sir. Off its hinges. That's a roger." Cudger winced. There would be a general meeting tomorrow. First thing. By then he'd have the commander's icon on his lapel. Even a sprite might be less likely to curse with the triple acorn logo winking in his face. Chicks pulled down the shrapnel goggles, even though the cab had quartz windscreen. The goggles were cool. Excuse me. Girls loved them, or so the driver thought. In his mind, he saw himself as a grim-faced daredevil. Sprites were like that. Give a fairy a pair of wings and he thinks he's God's gift to women. But Chick's Burbill's ill-fated quest to impress the dames is, once again, another story. In this particular tale, he serves only one purpose, and that is to melodramatically push the detonate button, which he does with great aplomb. 24 controlled charges detonated in their chambers, driving 24 alloy cylinders out of their mounts at over 1,000 miles per hour. Upon impact, each bar pulverized the contact area plus the surrounding 15 centimeters, effectively blowing the door off its hinges, as the captain would say. When the dust settled, the handlers winched back the containment wall inside the cage and began hammering the side panels with the flats of their hands. Cudgeon peeped out from behind the blast shield. "All clear, Captain?" "Just a second, Commander. Chicks, how we doing?" Chicks checked the cab monitor. "He's moving. Hammering is spooking him. Claws are coming out. My, he's a big sucker. I wouldn't want to be that recon babe if she gets in the way of this." Cudgeon felt a momentary pang of guilt, which he dispelled with his favorite daydream, a vision of himself sinking into a beige velour council seat. The cage heaved violently, almost dislodging Chicks from his seat. He held on like a rodeo rider. "Oh, he's on the move. Lock and load, boys. I have a feeling that any second we're going to be getting a cry for help." Cudgeon didn't bother locking and loading. He preferred to leave that sort of thing to the foot soldiers. The acting commander considered himself too important to be risked in an insecure situation. For the good of the people in general, it was better he remain outside the op zone. Butler took the stairs 4 at a time. It was possibly the first time he'd ever abandoned Master Artemis in a time of crisis, but Juliet was family, and there was obviously something very wrong with his baby sister. That fairy had said something to her, and now she was just sitting in the cell giggling. Butler filled the worst. If anything were to happen to Juliet, he didn't know how he'd live with himself. He felt a dribble of sweat slide down the crown of his shaved head. The whole situation was shooting off in bizarre directions. Fairies, magic, now a hostage on the manor. How could he be expected to control things? It took a 4-man team to guard the lowliest politician, but he was expected to contain this impossible situation on his own. Butler sprinted down the corridor into what had until recently been Captain Short's cell. Juliet was sprawled on the cot, enraptured by a concrete wall. "What are you doing?" he gasped, drawing the Sig Sauer 9mm with practiced ease. His sister barely spared him a glance. "Quiet, you big ape!" "Louis, the love machine is on. He ain't so tough. I could take him." Butler blinked. She was talking gibberish, obviously drugged. "Let's go. Artemis wants us upstairs in the Situation Room." Juliet pointed a manicured finger at the wall. "Artemis can wait. This is for the Intercontinental title, and it's a grudge match. Louis hates Hogman's pet piggy." The manservant studied the wall. It was definitely blank. He didn't have time for this. "Right, let's go," he growled, slinging his sister over his broad shoulder. "No, you big bully," she protested, hammering his back with tiny fists. "Not now! Hogman! Hogman!" Butler ignored the objections, settling into a loping run. Who the heck was this Hogman person? One of her boyfriends, no doubt. He was going to have to keep closer tabs on callers in the lodge in the future. "Butler, pick up." It was Artemis on the handheld. Butler jiggled his sister up on a foot so he could reach his belt. "Lollipops," barked his employer. Say again? I thought you said... Huh? I mean, get out of there. Take cover. Cover. Take cover? The military term didn't sound right coming out of Master Artemis' mouth, like a diamond ring in a lucky bag. Take cover? Yes, Butler, take cover. I thought speaking in primal terms would be the quickest route to your cognitive functions. Obviously, I was mistaken. That was more like it. Butler scanned the hall for a nook to duck into. Not much choice. The only shelter was provided by the suits of medieval armor punctuating the walls. The manservant ducked down into an alcove behind a 14th century knight complete with lance and mace. Juliet tapped the breastplate. You think I mean I could take you with one hand." "Quiet," hissed Butler. He held his breath and listened. Something was approaching the main door. Something big. Butler leaned out far enough to get one eye on the lobby. Then you could say that the doorway exploded. But that particular verb doesn't do the action justice. Rather, it shattered into infinitesimal pieces. Butler had seen something like this once before when a 4/7 earthquake had rippled through a Colombian drug lord's estate seconds before he'd been scheduled to blow it up. This was slightly different, more localized, very professional. It was classic anti-terrorist tactics. Hit him with smoke and sonics, then go in while the targets were disoriented. Whatever was coming, it would be bad. He was certain of it. He was absolutely right. Dust clouds settled slowly, depositing a pale sheet on the Tunisian rug. Madame Fowl would have been furious if she'd ever put so much as a toe outside the attic door. Butler's instincts told him to move. Zigzag across the ground floor, make for higher ground. Stay low to minimize the target. This would be the perfect time to do it, before visibility cleared. Any second now, a hail of bullets would be whistling through the archway, and the last place he wanted to be was pinned on the lower level. And on any other day, Butler would have moved. He would have been halfway up the stairway before his brain had time for second thoughts. But today he had his baby sister over his shoulder, sprouting gibberish, and the last thing he wanted to do was expose her to a murderous assault rifle. With Juliet in the state she was in, she'd probably challenge the fairy commandos to a tag wrestling match. And though his sister talked tough, she was just a kid, really. Not much for trained military personnel. So Butler hunkered down, propped Juliet against a tapestry behind a suit of armor, and checked his safety catch. Off, good. Come on and get me, fairy boys. Something moved in the dust haze. It was immediately obvious to Butler that this was something not human. The manservant had been on one too many safaris not to recognize an animal when he saw it. He studied the creature's gait. Possibly simian. Similar upper body structure to an ape, but bigger than any primate Butler had ever seen. If it was an ape, then his handgun wasn't going to be of much use. You could put 5 rounds in the skull of a bull ape, and he'd still have time to eat you before his brain realized he was dead. But it wasn't an ape. Apes didn't have night eyes. This creature did. Glowing crimson pupils, half hidden behind shaggy forelocks. Tusks, too, but not elephantine. These were curved with serrated edges. Gutting weapons. Butler felt a tingle low in his stomach. He'd had that feeling once before on his first day at the Swiss Academy. It was fear. The creature stepped clear of the dust haze. Butler gasped again, his first day since the academy. This was like no adversary he'd ever faced before. The manservant realized instantly what the fairies had done. They had sent in a primal hunter, a creature with no interest in magic or rules, a thing that would simply kill anything in its way, regardless of species. This was the perfect predator. That much was clear from the meat-ripping points on its teeth, from the dried gore crusted beneath its claws, and from the distilled hatred spilling from its eyes. The troll shambled forward, squinting through the chandelier light. Yellow claws scraped along the marble tiling, throwing up sparks in their wake. It was sniffing now, snorting curious breaths, head cocked to one side. Butler had seen that pose before on the snouts of starved pit bulls just before the Russian handler set them loose on a bear. The shaggy head froze, its snout pointed directly at Butler's hiding place. It was no coincidence. The manservant peeked out between the chainmail fingers of the gauntlet. Now came the stalk. Once a scent had been acquired, the predator would attempt a slow, silent approach before a lightning strike. But apparently the troll had not read the predator's handbook, because it didn't bother with stealth approach, jumping directly into lightning strike. Moving faster than Butler would have believed possible, the troll sprang across the lobby, brushing the medieval armor aside as though it were a shop mannequin. Juliet blinked. "Ooh," she gasped. "It's Bigfoot Bob, Canadian champion, 1998. I thought you were in the Andes looking for your relatives." Butler didn't bother to correct her. His sister wasn't lucid. At least she would die happy. While his brain was contemplating this morbid observation, Butler's gun hand was coming up. He squeezed the trigger as rapidly as the Sig Sauer's mechanism would allow. 2 in the chest, 3 between the eyes. That was the plan. He got the chest shots in, but the troll interfered before Butler could complete the formation. The interference took the form of a scything tusk that ducked below Butler's guard. They coiled around his trunk, slicing through his Kevlar-reinforced jacket like razor through rice paper. Butler felt a cold pain as the serrated ivory pierced his chest. He knew immediately that the wound was fatal. His breath came hard. That was a lung gone, and gouts of blood were matting the troll's fur. His blood. No one could lose that much and live. Nevertheless, the pain was instantly replaced by a curious euphoria. Some form of natural anesthetic injected through channels in the beast's tusks. More dangerous than the deadliest poison, in minutes Butler would not only stop struggling, but would go giggling to his grave. The manservant fought against the narcotics in the system, struggling furiously in the troll's grip, but it was no use. His fight was over before it had begun. The troll grunted, flipping the limp human body over his head. Butler's burly frame collided with the wall at a speed human bones were never meant to withstand. The bricks cracked from floor to ceiling. Butler's spine went too. Now even blood loss didn't get him, paralysis would. Juliet was still enthralled by the mesmer. "Come on, brother, get off the canvas. We know you're faking." The troll paused, some basic curiosity piqued by the lack of fear. He would have suspected a trick if he could have formulated such a complicated thought. But in the end, appetite won out. This creature smelled flesh, fresh and tender. Flesh from above ground was different, laced with surface smells. Once you've had an open-air meat, it's hard to go back. The troll ran a tongue over his incisors, then reached out a shaggy hand. And we're going to quit there for tonight. I'm sorry that I had light coming in, so I'm sorry I tried to adjust in the middle of the video, but there we go. So we're still in Chapter 8. We have more to hear about the troll, and we'll finish that up tomorrow. I hope you all have a good evening.